The helicopter blades cut through the thick Afghan air as Staff Sergeant Marcus Rivera checked his rifle for the 100th time. Below them, the rugged mountains of Helmand Province stretched endlessly, hiding countless dangers in their shadows. Rivera wasn't just any soldier. He was a Navy SEAL sniper with over 200 confirmed kills and a reputation for never missing his target. 10 minutes out, the pilot's voice crackled through their headsets. Rivera looked around at his fellow SEALs. These weren't just teammates, they were brothers who had been through hell together. Tonight's mission was supposed to be routine: extract a high-value target from a Taliban stronghold and get out clean. The intelligence reports had been clear. 30 to 40 enemy fighters in the compound. Standard extraction. In and out in 2 hours maximum. Rivera had done missions like this dozens of times before, but something felt different tonight. The air was too still, the silence too perfect. As their helicopter approached the landing zone, Rivera's trained eyes scanned the terrain below. Years of combat had given him an almost supernatural ability to sense danger. The compound sat nestled between two rocky hills, creating what military tacticians called a kill box. A perfect place for an ambush. "LZ looks clear," reported Lieutenant Johnson, the team leader. But Rivera's gut told him otherwise. He had learned long ago to trust that feeling. It had kept him alive through 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq. The first helicopter touched down, deploying 20 SEALs into the darkness. Rivera was in the second wave, along with the rest of Alpha Team. As his boots hit the ground, he immediately took position on a small ridge overlooking the target compound. His job was overwatch, to protect his brothers below while they completed the extraction. Through his scope, Rivera watched as Bravo Team approached the main building. The night vision revealed everything in eerie green detail. The compound appeared deserted, exactly as intelligence had predicted. Too perfect, Rivera thought to himself. Then it happened. The first muzzle flash erupted from a hidden position on the hillside opposite Rivera's location. Within seconds, the entire valley lit up with gunfire. Tracer rounds streaked through the darkness like deadly fireworks. The SEALs below found themselves caught in a carefully planned crossfire. "Contact! Contact!" Johnson's voice exploded over the radio. "We're taking heavy fire from multiple positions." Rivera's training kicked in instantly. Through his scope, he began identifying targets. 1 Taliban fighter. 2. 3. His rifle spoke with deadly precision, each shot finding its mark. But for every enemy he eliminated, 2 more seemed to take their place. The intelligence had been catastrophically wrong. This wasn't a compound with 40 fighters. Rivera counted at least 200 muzzle flashes lighting up the hills around them. The SEALs hadn't walked into a routine extraction. They had stumbled into the largest Taliban gathering in the province. "We need immediate extraction." Johnson's voice was strained but controlled. "Requesting air support." "Unrelevant." "Requesting air support." The response from command came back cold and calculated. "Negative on air support. Mission parameters unchanged. Complete the objective and extract as planned." Rivera couldn't believe what he was hearing. His brothers were surrounded and outgunned 10 to 1, and command was refusing to send help. The high-value target they were supposed to extract was nowhere to be found. This had all the hallmarks of a setup. As bullets whistled past his position, Rivera made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He keyed his radio and spoke directly to his team leader. "Johnson, this is Rivera. I'm not leaving this position until every last one of our guys is out of that kill zone. Rivera, you have your orders. We extract in 15 minutes with or without air support. Copy that?" "Sir," Rivera replied. But in his mind, he was already formulating a different plan. From his elevated position, Rivera could see the full scope of the disaster unfolding below. 3 SEALs were pinned down behind a crumbling stone wall, taking heavy fire from at least 6 different positions. 2 more were trapped in the compound itself, unable to move without exposing themselves to sniper fire. The Taliban had clearly planned this ambush for weeks. They knew exactly where the SEALs would land, exactly which routes they would take to the compound, and exactly how to cut off their escape routes. Someone had leaked their mission details. Rivera's scope found another target, a Taliban commander directing fire from a machine gun nest. One shot. The commander dropped. But immediately, another fighter took his place. Sniper 1, this is base command. A new voice came over the radio. You are ordered to fall back to extraction point Alpha immediately. Rivera looked down at his brothers, still trapped and fighting for their lives. The extraction point was 2 kilometers away. Across open ground. If they tried to reach it under this kind of fire, half of them would never make it. Negative, base command, Rivera responded, surprising himself with the calmness in his voice. I have multiple friendlies in immediate danger. I'm staying put. Sniper 1, that is a direct order. Fall back immediately or face court-martial. Rivera turned off his radio. For the next hour, he single-handedly held off waves of Taliban fighters trying to overrun his teammates' positions. His rifle barrel grew hot from constant firing. He went through magazine after magazine, each shot carefully placed to maximum effect. When 2 SEALs made a desperate run for better cover, Rivera provided covering fire that kept them alive. When a Taliban rocket team tried to set up on the opposite ridge, Rivera eliminated them before they could fire a single round. But the enemy kept coming. For every fighter Rivera dropped, it seemed like 2 more appeared. His ammunition was running low, and he could see that his teammates below were in the same situation. That's when Rivera saw something that made his blood run cold. Through his scope, he spotted a large group of Taliban fighters moving through a dried riverbed toward his teammates' flanks. If they reached their destination, they would have a clear shot at the trapped SEALs. Rivera faced an impossible choice. He could follow orders and try to escape to the extraction point, potentially saving his own life, or he could stay and fight, knowing that it might mean certain death but also knowing that leaving would doom his brothers. The choice was easier than he expected. Rivera had taken an oath when he became a SEAL, an oath that meant something more than following orders from officers sitting safely hundreds of miles away. An oath to never leave a fallen comrade. He picked up his rifle and began moving toward a better position, one that would give him a clear shot at the advancing Taliban force. As he moved, enemy bullets chewed up the ground around him. One round passed so close to his head that he felt the heat. But Rivera kept moving. His brothers needed him, and he had never let them down before. He wasn't about to start now. As he settled into his new position, Rivera could hear the helicopter extraction team calling over the radio, demanding that all teams move to the pickup zone immediately. The time window for extraction was closing fast. Rivera looked through his scope at the Taliban fighters still advancing on his teammates. Then he looked toward the extraction point, barely visible in the distance. He made his choice. Number, against all odds. Rivera's new position gave him a perfect view of the advancing Taliban force, but it also made him a prime target. Within minutes of settling behind a cluster of rocks, enemy fire began concentrating on his location. Bullets sparked off the stone around him, sending sharp fragments flying. Through his scope, he could see his teammates below growing desperate. Petty Officer Martinez had taken a bullet to the shoulder but was still returning fire. Sergeant Thompson was down to his last magazine. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and the extraction helicopters wouldn't wait much longer. All teams, this is Falcon Base, came the urgent voice over the radio. Extraction in T-5 minutes. All personnel must be at the LZ, or mission is aborted. Rivera watched as his teammates looked toward the distant extraction point. It was an impossible distance to cover under such heavy fire, but he also knew that if the helicopters left without them, there would be no rescue mission. Command had made it clear that this operation was strictly off the books. Lieutenant Johnson's voice cut through the radio chatter. All teams, we move to extraction point in 30 seconds. Covering fire on my mark. Rivera knew what that meant. His teammates were going to make a desperate sprint across open ground, hoping to reach the helicopters before being cut down. It was suicide, but it was their only chance. Wait. Rivera keyed his radio one more time. I can see the entire Taliban position from here. Give me 2 minutes to thin them out. Negative, Rivera. "We move now, or we all die here." But Rivera was already in action. His rifle found target after target among the Taliban fighters. Each shot was perfect, dropping an enemy soldier and creating confusion in their ranks, but there were simply too many of them. That's when Rivera remembered something his grandfather had told him. His grandfather had been a Marine in Vietnam, and he used to say that sometimes a single soldier in the right position at the right time could change the course of an entire battle. Rivera pulled out 2 fragmentation grenades from his vest. His plan was dangerous and probably suicidal, but it might create enough chaos to give his teammates a chance. He began moving down the hillside toward the largest concentration of Taliban fighters. His movement immediately drew heavy fire, but Rivera used every piece of cover available, rocks, trees, abandoned equipment, to shield his advance. When he was within throwing distance of the enemy position, Rivera pulled the pins on both grenades and hurled them into the midst of the Taliban fighters. The twin explosions created exactly the chaos he had hoped for. Immediately, Rivera was on his feet, firing rapidly at the disoriented enemy soldiers. His sudden appearance from an unexpected direction sent the Taliban fighters scrambling for cover, breaking their organized fire patterns. "Move! Move! Move!" Rivera shouted into his radio. Below in the valley, his teammates didn't waste the opportunity. They emerged from cover and began their desperate dash toward the extraction point. Rivera provided covering fire, picking off any Taliban fighter who tried to target his running teammates. But his position was now completely exposed. Enemy fire converged on him from multiple directions. A bullet grazed his left arm, spinning him around. Another shot shattered the scope on his rifle. Rivera switched to iron sights and kept firing. Through the chaos and smoke, he could see his teammates making progress toward the extraction zone. 300 meters, 200 meters, 100 meters. Then disaster struck. Sergeant Williams stumbled and fell. He had been hit in the leg and couldn't continue running. The rest of the team turned back to help him, but that would put them all in danger again. Rivera saw what was happening and made another split-second decision. He emerged from cover completely, standing in full view of the enemy fighters, and began laying down a massive volume of fire. Every Taliban fighter in the area turned their attention to him, giving his teammates the time they needed to help Williams and continue their escape. The effect was immediate and devastating. Rivera became the target of over 50 enemy weapons. Bullets filled the air around him like a deadly storm. He felt one round punch through his right thigh, then another graze his ribs, but he kept firing, even as his world narrowed to the simple act of putting rounds on target. He could no longer see his teammates clearly, but he could hear the helicopters in the distance. The extraction was happening. When his rifle finally ran empty, Rivera drew his sidearm and continued engaging targets. His movements were becoming slower now, the blood loss taking its toll, but he could hear something that filled him with fierce satisfaction, the sound of helicopter engines growing louder. The extraction was successful. His brothers were getting out. A Taliban fighter appeared around a large boulder, rifle raised. Rivera tried to bring his pistol up, but his arm felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The enemy soldier smiled, seeing that the American sniper was finished. Then the fighter's head snapped back as a rifle round took him down. Rivera looked up to see Petty Officer Martinez running back down the hillside toward him, firing as he came. "I told you we never leave anyone behind," Martinez shouted as he reached Rivera's position. Behind Martinez came 2 more SEALs, Thompson and Rodriguez. They had broken away from the extraction to come back for their sniper. "You idiots should have stayed on that helicopter," Rivera gasped as his teammates helped him to his feet. "Yeah, well, we're all idiots together," Thompson replied, shouldering Rivera's weight. "Now let's get out of here before those helicopters leave without us." The 4 SEALs began a fighting retreat back toward the extraction point. The Taliban fighters, sensing that their prey was escaping, pressed their attack with renewed fury. The hillside erupted in gunfire as the enemy tried to prevent their escape, but now the odds had changed. Instead of one isolated sniper, the Taliban faced 4 highly trained Navy SEALs fighting for each other's lives. They moved like a single organism, each covering the others as they bounded back up the hillside. Rivera, despite his wounds, continued to engage targets whenever he could. His teammates had risked everything to come back for him, and he wasn't going to let them down. As they crested the ridge, they could see the extraction helicopters in the distance. But they could also see something else. More Taliban vehicles arriving at the base of the hill. Reinforcements were pouring into the area. "Those helicopters better not leave without us," Rodriguez muttered as they began their final push toward the landing zone. The race was on. 4 wounded SEALs against time, distance, and a determined enemy force. The extraction helicopters were already beginning to lift off as they approached, but the pilots had spotted them and were holding position. Rivera knew that his teammates' decision to come back for him had put all their lives at risk, but it had also proven something that he had always believed: that the bonds between SEALs were stronger than any enemy fire or direct order from command. As they reached the landing zone, enemy fire erupted from multiple positions around them. The helicopter door gunner opened up with his machine gun, providing covering fire as the 4 SEALs ran the final 50 meters to safety. Rivera felt hands pulling him up into the helicopter as bullets pinged off the aircraft's armor. As the helicopter lifted off and banked away from the battlefield, he looked back at the hillside where they had fought for their lives. The Taliban fighters were still there, still firing uselessly at the departing aircraft. But they had failed in their primary objective. Not a single SEAL had been left behind. As the helicopter flew toward safety, Rivera closed his eyes and thought about the choice he had made. He had disobeyed direct orders from his superiors. He had risked court-martial and the end of his military career. But every one of his brothers was alive, and that made it all worthwhile. Number the price of honor. The helicopter touched down at the forward operating base just as the sun began to rise over the Afghan mountains. Rivera was immediately rushed to the medical tent, where army doctors worked to stabilize his wounds. The bullet in his thigh had missed the major artery by millimeters. The graze along his ribs had cracked 2 bones but hadn't penetrated his body armor. As the medics worked on him, Rivera could hear heated voices from outside the tent. Command was not happy about how the mission had gone down. Multiple direct orders had been disobeyed, and there would be consequences. Lieutenant Johnson appeared at Rivera's bedside as the doctors finished their work. His face was grim, but there was something else in his eyes. Respect. "How are you feeling, Staff Sergeant?" "Like I got run over by a tank, sir, but I'll live," Johnson nodded slowly. "That's more than we can say for the Taliban fighters you engaged. Intelligence estimates you personally eliminated over 30 enemy combatants during that firefight." Rivera didn't feel pride at the number. Each shot had been necessary to protect his teammates, but he took no joy in killing. "Sir, what's the situation with command?" Johnson's expression darkened. "Colonel Harrison is flying in from Kabul. He wants to speak with you personally about your refusal to follow direct orders." Rummoned. Colonel Harrison. Rivera had expected this. Colonel Harrison was known throughout the special operations community as a by-the-books officer who believed that discipline was the foundation of military effectiveness. Disobeying orders in combat was one of the most serious offenses a soldier could commit. Over the next 3 days, while Rivera recovered from his wounds, the investigation began. Military police interviewed every member of the extraction team. Radio communications were analyzed. After-action reports were filed and reviewed. The official story, according to command, was that Staff Sergeant Rivera had endangered the entire mission by refusing to follow extraction orders. His actions had forced 3 other SEALs to risk their lives unnecessarily. The mission had been a failure because the high-value target had not been captured. But there was another story circulating among the enlisted personnel at the base. Word had spread about how Rivera had single-handedly held off an entire Taliban force to protect his teammates. Soldiers who had never met him approached Rivera with handshakes and words of thanks. They understood what command apparently didn't, that sometimes doing the right thing meant breaking the rules. When Colonel Harrison finally arrived, he brought with him a team of investigators from military intelligence. The colonel was a tall, stern man with steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to see through everything. "Staff Sergeant Rivera," he began as he entered the medical tent. "I've read the after-action reports. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Rivera struggled to sit up straighter in his hospital bed. Sir, I acted to protect the lives of my fellow SEALs. Given the same situation, I would make the same choice again, even knowing that your actions constituted direct disobedience of lawful orders? Yes, sir. Colonel Harrison studied Rivera for a long moment. Do you understand that your actions could result in a court-martial? That you could face prison time? I understand, sir. But my teammates are alive. That's what matters to me. I. That's. I. The colonel's expression was unreadable. You realize that military discipline exists for a reason, Staff Sergeant. If every soldier decides for himself which orders to follow, we have chaos instead of a fighting force. Rivera met the colonel's gaze steadily. With respect, sir, I didn't make that decision lightly. I was in the best position to assess the tactical situation on the ground. My teammates were going to die if someone didn't act. What happened next surprised everyone in the tent. Colonel Harrison pulled up a chair and sat down beside Rivera's bed. His stern expression softened slightly. Staff Sergeant, 3 days ago, military intelligence discovered that our mission had been compromised. A Taliban informant working inside our Afghan National Army partners had leaked our entire operational plan. That's why you walked into such a heavily defended position. Rivera felt a chill run down his spine. His instincts on the night of the mission had been correct. The Taliban had been planning that ambush for over a week, the colonel continued. They knew our exact insertion point, our extraction timeline, and our operational objectives. It was designed to wipe out an entire SEAL team. The tent fell silent as the implications sank in. Furthermore, Colonel Harrison continued, our investigation has revealed that the extraction order you refused to follow came not from operational command, but from someone who had no authority over combat operations. We believe it was part of the same intelligence leak that compromised the mission. Rivera's mind reeled. Sir, are you saying someone was trying to get us killed? I'm saying that someone wanted your team to leave their positions and expose themselves to enemy fire. If you had followed those orders, intelligence estimates indicate that casualties would have been 100%. The colonel stood up and began pacing. Your refusal to follow what you believed were lawful orders saved the lives of every man on your team. Your tactical decisions during the firefight were textbook examples of small unit leadership under extreme pressure. Rivera didn't know what to say. He had prepared himself for a court-martial, possibly prison time. He had never expected this. However, Colonel Harrison continued, we still have a problem. You did disobey what you believed were direct orders. Even if those orders came from a compromised source, you had no way of knowing that at the time. Rivera nodded. I understand, sir. No, I don't think you do. The colonel's expression had changed again. Staff Sergeant Rivera, you are being recommended for the Medal of Honor. The words hit Rivera like a physical blow. The Medal of Honor was the highest military decoration, reserved for acts of valor that went far beyond the call of duty. Sir, I was just doing my job. No, Staff Sergeant. Your job was to provide sniper overwatch and then extract with your team. What you did was choose to sacrifice your own life to save your teammates. What you did was engage over 200 enemy fighters single-handedly while wounded. What you did was inspire 3 of your teammates to risk their own lives to come back for you, because they had learned from your example what it means to never leave anyone behind. Colonel Harrison pulled out a folder and opened it. The after-action reports from your teammates make for interesting reading. According to Petty Officer Martinez, you eliminated between 30 and 40 enemy fighters during the engagement. According to Sergeant Thompson, your covering fire was the only reason they were able to reach the extraction point. According to all of them, you are the reason they're still alive. Rivera felt tears forming in his eyes, but he fought them back. SEALs don't cry. There's something else, Staff Sergeant. The intelligence failure that nearly got your team killed has led to a complete restructuring of how special operations are planned and executed in this theater. Your actions that night didn't just save 13 lives, they exposed a security breach that could have cost hundreds of lives in future operations. The colonel closed the folder and looked directly at Rivera. Sometimes, Staff Sergeant, following orders isn't the same thing as doing what's right. What you did that night was right, even if it wasn't strictly legal under military law. Over the following months, Rivera recovered from his wounds and returned to active duty. The Medal of Honor ceremony took place at the White House, with his entire team in attendance. But for Rivera, the real honor came every time he looked at his teammates and saw that they were alive. The Taliban informant was eventually discovered and captured. The intelligence leak was plugged, and new security protocols were implemented. The high-value target they had been sent to capture was killed in a drone strike 3 weeks later. But none of that mattered to Rivera as much as a simple fact. When faced with an impossible choice between following orders and saving lives, he had chosen to save lives. And 13 Navy SEALs had gone home to their families because of that choice. Years later, when young SEALs would ask Rivera about that night in Afghanistan, he would tell them something his grandfather had taught him. Sometimes the hardest thing about being a soldier isn't learning to follow orders. Sometimes it's learning when not to follow them. Rivera retired from the Navy after 20 years of service. But he never forgot the lesson of that night in the Afghan mountains. Leadership wasn't about blind obedience to authority. It was about making the hard choices when lives hung in the balance. It was about knowing when to say screw the orders and do what's right. The official after-action report stated that the mission was a tactical failure but a strategic success. 13 SEALs had been successfully extracted from an ambush situation with minimal casualties. The intelligence breach had been identified and corrected. But for Staff Sergeant Marcus Rivera and the 12 men whose lives he saved, it was something much simpler. It was proof that the bonds between warriors are stronger than any enemy fire, any direct order, or any threat of punishment. It was proof that sometimes, one person willing to stand up and fight can make all the difference in the world.